Hey, this is Rocket Brain Surgeon. Today we're looking at the T110E4. We're following around Precambrian as he's in this Tier 10 US tank destroyer, characterized mostly by that turret, which is definitely a rarity on tank destroyers. But I don't actually think of the E4 as a tank destroyer. I kind of think of it more of a heavy, and so if my review of it or rating or thoughts are a little bit harsh, it's because I'm not actually thinking of it as a tank destroyer. I'm comparing it to things like the E5 or the E100, and now you might think that that's completely unfair, and I'll try to show you why I think that is fair. Let's start with the camouflage. The camouflage is not great. It's going to be classified kind of around most heavies in tier. And now, a tank destroyer doesn't always have to have great camouflage. Look at the Waffle, for example, some of the worst camouflage in game. The E4 does have that turret, and the turret, one thing to note about it is it only rotates 90 degrees to each side, so you can't spin it the full way around. Now, that turret is going to give you some flexibility, so you're probably not going to be hanging around the usual locations. He just got hit by the 704 in the tumor on top. That's going to be a relatively common event. One thing to note is just because the E4 looks very similar to the E3, except instead of having a casemate, it has a turret that can rotate, the armor art profile on the two tanks is not similar. So the cupola on top for the E4 is only rated to about 250 millimeters effective armor in many spots, can be as low as around 200. On the E3, that cupola is rated to about 350 millimeters effective armor. So on the E3, it's nearly impenetrable, where on the E4, it's actually pretty easy to penetrate. So more on how that turret really shapes the gameplay of the E4. Yeah, I mean, the turret isn't completely unique. The 183 has a turret, the Waffle has a turret, but they're rear-mounted turrets. You can only do so much with a rear-mounted turret. The turret on the E4 is kind of central forward, and that leads you to play in different spots. Tank destroyers don't sit in the spots that they sit out of choice. They often sit there because they have to. They really can't go into certain areas because their inflexibility without having a turret and their limited traverse simply prevents them from moving into different areas. But you have a lot of options with the E4, and so you want to take them. But you're going to find yourself going to places where the heavy tanks go towards. You're not going to go with the mediums because the traverse on the E4 is just not going to be good enough. And you're not going to hang out with the traditional tank destroyers because you can do so much more. So you don't have the mobility of a medium, right? We all know that. You don't have the camouflage or damage per minute profile of traditional tank destroyers. You also generally play where heavies play, so I think that's why it's pretty clear to treat the T110E4 similar to a heavy. A lot of people have trouble with that concept, but I find it pretty clear. And here's where the E4 kind of lets me down. Don't get me wrong, there's some great advantages to the E4. Having a heavy tank with 750 alpha and great penetration is awesome. Absolutely awesome. There's no denying that. The mobility is pretty solid as well. The top speed is mildly mediocre. The effective aim time isn't quite as good as something like the E5 or the 215B or anything like that. But what really lets me down about the E4 is the hit points. Since we can think of the E4 as a heavy tank, we're playing where heavies are, and you have that vulnerability in the cupola, and the cheeks of the E4 can also be penetrated by high penetration rounds, whether that's the base high pen rounds of a tank destroyer or somebody wants to shoot gold through there, they can do so. You only have 2,000 hit points, and that's a pretty big liability. When you're up against something like an E100, you can have the problem where you're trading shots, and the E100 just has 700 hit points more than you. That can be pretty tough to deal with. But for the most part, that's the only real downside, is you are mostly a heavy, but not quite a heavy, and that's a relatively low downside. For the most part, the E4 is a very comfortable tank. It's going to be able to play well on a lot of different maps. You need to use a bit of planning to get where you want to go, as the speed you can see is not the most amazing out there. It's good enough to do the job, but if you have to go cross map too much, the tank will let you down. That's not too bad of a weakness. If you're the type that prefers a generalist view over a more specialized view, because sometimes a specialized tank can be quite annoying. For example, I love the Bat Chat, but then all of a sudden here comes Himmelsdorf, and you're in close quarters combat with a paper tank based on camouflage, and that can be pretty annoying. The E4 is going to do well on a lot of different situations and a lot of different maps. You shouldn't hate to see too terribly many maps. Maybe like Malinovka or Muravanka or Prokhorovka can be moderately annoying at times, but it can still do its job pretty well. Even in peekaboom situations, city maps are going to be great. You can have some long-distance combat with the high alpha gun that's going to be pretty great. So there's definitely a lot of upside and a lot of good things to say about having a generalist tank such as the E4. Precam just got hit by an enemy E4 just off on his left, and the enemy E4 is caught in probably the worst situation. He's kind of in the open, and the base reload time on the E4 is like 19 odd seconds. That's just awful. The traverse isn't going to be great. You really need hard cover to reload in at that time, so he quickly goes down. If you like comfortable tanks, the E4 certainly could be your thing. It's in a great line, in a fine tech tree, with solid tanks all the way up. It will serve you well in a lot of games. Precambrian wrote a full review on the tank. The link is in the comments. Go check it out. Hope you enjoyed. Happy hunting.